Follow up, and that I listen to a lot of radio, including both sides of the coin, and I've heard this statement, which I tell everyone I can tell, that if you're going to vote this year, and please vote this year, don't vote for Democrats and Republicans. You're just wasting your vote. You know, it's worthless to vote for Democrats and Republicans. And to find a third party, I don't necessarily pitch the Green Party because I want them to decide for themselves. I want them to go out and look for a third party, find out the party's values, and stick to that party and vote for that party. Yeah. And just ignore the Democrats or Republicans. Now, I'm not alone because I listen to a lot of radio, and noted people on these radio shows say, I'm sick and tired of the Republicrats, you know, and we got to go away from this two-party system and get somebody else involved. So I think this is the year.
It is. It really is. Yes. And we'll come back to that because that is really an important backdrop to this whole thing about how incredibly timely this whole thing is. Not only that a lot of forces are coming together to make it possible, but that other things are happening that make it absolutely essential. If we're going to get out of here alive, you know, we really need to start building the alternative in a way that's prepared to take power soon. You know, this isn't hypothetical, this is what we really need to do. And let's see, did you want to say something real quick before we jump in?
You just arrived? Do you want to say anything?
Yes. We're just doing our last...
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, we'll take care of it. You go, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're just doing like a quick minute, sort of what, you know, how are we putting this together as a campaign? How are we seeing this? You know, what is sort of the strategic opportunity in the moment, and why this is such a, you know, it's a life-changing moment, it's a world-changing moment, you know, it's also sort of a Hail Mary moment, you know? It's like, this is the time to throw that pass, folks, because we're not going to have another chance, you know, that in so many ways we are in a moment of historic crisis right now, historic converging crisis of the economy, of our ecology, of peace and global security, and of democracy. And all these crises are converging in a way which is extremely serious and life-threatening. So we need to change history right now, but history is sort of delivering the potential to do that in a way which is so exciting and thrilling. And we need, you know, a transformative solution, not just little tweaks around the sides, you know, around the margins, little things that we think the power structure is willing to give us. No, we need to stand up and take charge here. And there's very good reason for us to do that. When I say us, I mean a broad coalition for people, planet, and peace over profit. You know, that's sort of the vision in a nutshell. It's sort of the spectrum of justice. Because when you put us together, when you put us together, we have the numbers, we have the power, we have the solutions, we've got the blueprints, or the green prints, as my friend Larry Brahm over there, and Jody Grage, who just come in, wonderful teammates here. Thank you for being here. We're just sort of jumping into our discussion right now. Yeah. We've got the ideas, we've got the agenda that has enormous public resonance. And in fact, when you add up the numbers, we've got all the numbers that it takes. And in fact, it's just the propaganda of the political predators. And I think, you know, we need to call them that because this is a predatory political establishment. It's not neutral. You know, it's created this mess, and it's being rewarded richly for it. And, you know, from their point of view, things are working great. But when you actually add up the numbers of the people who are being crushed, and, you know, the numbers are something like 84% of the world now is living in extremely deep poverty, and it's getting worse. It's not getting better. It's actually getting worse. And in the U.S., you know, we have our own version of that, which is very difficult. We have a different kind of poverty. In some ways it's not so extreme, but in other ways it's much more toxic. And we don't have kind of the sense of community and cultural support that more traditional cultures have. So, you know, it's its own unique problem here in the U.S. But when you add up our numbers, we have all the numbers that it takes. And if you look, for example, at young people in debt, young and not so young, because there's a whole lot of people now of growing ages, you know, who are in debt, because the debt cannot be repaid in the economy that we have. And when you add up those numbers now, it's like 43 million and counting who are in this predatory debt, which essentially makes you an indentured servant for the long haul. Why is that? Because we have an economy which is largely temp and part-time jobs. We have now a new record, more temporary jobs now than ever before. 9 out of 10 types of jobs being created don't require a high school degree. You know, this is where the economy has been engineered. This is where we're at. So that debt fundamentally cannot be repaid. So when the word gets out to young people in debt that they can cancel their debt simply by coming out and voting green in 2016, if that word gets out, there's no way we're going to be able to stop 43 million people from coming out to cancel their debt. And no one is more positioned to network and self-mobilize than that younger generation in debt on social media and Facebook, etc. And as that begins to happen, you know, we have this rising tide that's going to build on itself. It's like a tsunami. And that could actually happen. You know, people say to me, are you going to win? You know, and I say, well, I'm not holding my breath, but I'm not ruling it out either, because there actually is a realistic pathway towards winning. And it could be as simple as letting young people, empowering young people to empower each other to know to come out and cancel debt. Because that alone, I have yet to find the young person in debt who learns about that, who doesn't then instantly become, you know, a missionary for this campaign. And it's a self-perpetuating solution, because if you unleash young people in debt to actually become productive members of society again, and creative members of society, not just the latest cash cow who's being wrung, you know, for every last cent, which is how the younger generation is being treated. You know, who wouldn't stay home when you've basically been slapped around like that? Young people are basically, you know, exploited on debt, on the skyrocketing cost of education, on the lousy jobs which they've inherited, the lousy economy, and the climate catastrophe. This all falls on the shoulders of young people. Who wouldn't stay home? I mean, why come out and vote when it's just two versions of that predatory future? So, you know, to change the story there, and it was 80% of young people who sat out the last election in 2014, 80% stayed home, which is not that different from 2/3 of US voters in total who stayed home in the last election. That's why one of our mottos is that the lesser evil paves the way to the greater evil. You will get there, because lesser evilism discourages people from voting. Why come out? People don't get inspired against things, they get inspired for things. So another motto that you may want to pass on to people, you know, is to forget the lesser evil and to stand up and fight for the greater good. Our lives depend on it, now more than ever. And that's basically what our agenda is about. It's an agenda of greater good that actually is workable, and people are blown away to hear this well-kept secret that we can actually solve these problems. And I'll come back to that in a moment. But, you know, I just wanted to stress that the politics of fear that tells you have to silence yourself and just buy into the least worst, you know, it not only makes people stay home, makes them, you know, tune out and tune into something else. You know, it's basically a dead end, but it's false. You know, the politics of fear has delivered everything we were afraid of. All those reasons you were told you had to vote for the lesser evil because you didn't want the massive Wall Street bailouts, you didn't want the offshoring of our jobs, you didn't want another Trans-Pacific Partnership type corporate trade agreement, you didn't want the meltdown of the climate, you didn't want the attack on immigrants, on our civil liberties, on press freedoms, on the massive expansion of drone warfare and the so-called war on terror, which is terror and which creates terror itself. Those were all the reasons people were told they had to do this so-called safe vote. But that safe vote is the most dangerous thing imaginable. That safe vote basically guarantees that we continue down this lethal trajectory. And, you know, of greater student debt, of the privatization of our schools, of high-stakes testing, of the school-to-prison pipeline, of, you know, massive foreclosures and homelessness. That's what we bought into. And issue by issue, you can look at the record of the Obama administration, even when they had 2 Democratic houses of Congress. That's what they accomplished, and I can give you the numbers on that if you want them. But they basically blew up all the bad things Bush had done. They made him look like a wimp. They massively expanded on that. And they did, you know, on small tweaks around the margins, you could find areas where their policies are less predatory. But in terms of the fundamental economics, our civil liberties, our foreign policy, our economy, and the climate, you know, this is devastation. And another, you know, people often are at a loss for how do you speak to folks who are just kind of like operating on zombie politics. You know, how do you speak to them? Well, another little phrase, let me think which one I was about to give you. Well, you know, one is that the politics of fear has delivered everything we were afraid of. And it has, you know, it's the politics of courage that we need. And another example you can cite there is what happened under Richard Nixon, one of the most, you know, regressive, oppressive, and corrupt presidents ever. We brought the troops home from Vietnam. We really pushed the Supreme Court to provide women the right to choose. We established the EPA, OSHA, and workers' health and safety, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act. There was nothing we couldn't do because we understood that we are our democracy and we have to drive the agenda and who's in office and what they do. So trading your power, our power of democracy, for, you know, this concept that we're going to silence ourselves and expect a corporate political party and a corporate politician to, you know, to give us little small things here and there, you know, that's just nuts. We cannot trade our fundamental democracy and our mobilization and our intentions to stand up and fight for what we need. That's what's going to win the day. And we need that politics of courage in the voting booth in the same way that we need it out in the street. And, you know, that's what we can do in this incredible, historic, transformative moment that we're in. Let me just say a few words about how we solve this. And that first little, you know, I sort of consider myself a political therapist. You know, I've moved from practicing clinical medicine to practicing political medicine because it's the mother of all evils, or we should say the mother of all illnesses, politics that is. And we've got to like cure our political illness in order to cure all the other things that are literally killing us. And in addition, you know, I sort of think of my role as helping people. I mean, we all have to play this role, I think, of political therapists, and helping our friends and colleagues find their political power. It's like helping a friend break up with an abusive relationship. It's like breaking up with the Democratic Party. You know, it's like you just have to get back in touch. That you deserve better. You shouldn't be making excuses for your abuser. And you'll find people do that over and over. So it's about empowering each other to tap into our power and our right to have a world that actually works for us. An America that works for all of us and a world that works for all of us. And I better grab a cup of water from someone.
Water? Come on.
So of course here at the very beginning. Thank you.
Over there.
So I'm just going to name, so that's just sort of like a dose of political therapy for us all to chew on, to recognize that we have the numbers. And let me just quote some numbers for you. 50% of people in the latest Wall Street Journal poll, which was done at the end of the summer, thank you.
That's good Portland water now.
All right, can't beat it, thank you.
I should have brought my stuff.
Keep it that way. 50%, thank you, of American voters now have basically divorced the Democratic and Republican parties. And in fact, disapproval rates are majority. Majorities disapprove, that is, have unfavorable views of both Democrats and Republicans. So it's 50% now who do not regard themselves as Democrat or Republican. And it's 21% who identify as Republicans, and it is 29% that regard themselves as Democrats. So remember, you're in a really good position to start with. Don't let them talk you into a defensive mindset where you think that, you know, oh, we're just some marginal fringe group. And I have to tell you one other just quick anecdote to drive this home. The first time I was tricked into running for office, which was in 2000, preparing for the 2002 election, running as governor in Massachusetts, I was tricked into running, thinking that it would just be, you know, just do what you're doing, you know, as an environmental health advocate. It became more complicated than that, but it got more fun as it went along once you get tricked into doing it, which is something no one in their right mind would want to do, but once you are forced or tricked, it definitely has a lot of redeeming value, and it can be very, very fun if you're doing it with integrity and you're really doing it to build the movement. It's a no-lose proposition, it really is. And so anyhow, we fought our way into a debate, and this was a televised gubernatorial debate with Mitt Romney and a few other notables. The treasurer of the state as well was running as a Democrat, a libertarian, and one other person. So we had a televised debate because the mobs were just coming out and saying, no, this is absurd, we need an open debate. So we called out such a loud and boisterous crowd that they finally agreed to let us into a debate. And in that debate, I articulated the basic green agenda for people, planet, and peace over profit. And it was treated like it was the lunatic fringe in that discussion. And inside the debate hall, those ideas went over like a lead balloon. This was like in the TV studio, okay? So it's just candidates and a moderator. And when we walked out from the debate, I was mobbed by the press, who told me that I had won the debate on the instant online viewer poll. And it was like suddenly, you know, the light went off in my head, and I realized the way that we think, and part of what we were doing, we were arguing against high-stakes testing and saying that, no, we need to teach to the whole student for lifetime learning. We need, you know, we need schools that are about education, that are about music and recreation and arts and community engagement and stuff like that, and healthcare is a human right, and, you know, the usual agenda. And, you know, lo and behold, it wasn't the lunatic fringe. It was like what most people wanted even back in 2002 when things weren't nearly as difficult and really desperate as they are today. So, you know, that was just, that was the beginning of my awakening that, no, this is not futile, that they are just working overtime to try to convince us that we are powerless, because they are quaking in their boots at how powerful we are the minute we get together and we push forward. The minute we recognize our power. Alice Walker has this great quote about how the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. But once you recognize that we have it and you flick that switch from powerless to powerful, and we start acting on it, you know, this is a transformative moment. And the critical issue is to go outside of the circles. So many of us activists, you know, are coming from relatively privileged and educated backgrounds, so we think everybody thinks like our demographic, you know, but in fact most people who are struggling, the average worker's wages right now is barely above poverty. 40% of workers are making $20,000 a year or less. You know, household wealth has collapsed by 40%. You know, cost of health care has doubled for workers over the last 5 years with this great Affordable Care Act, which is not affordable and not particularly caring either. So there's a lot of momentum and support out there, and it's all about being strategic about who do we talk to and the networks that we go out and support and work to mobilize. So you know, it's a whole new world out there, and I'm just going to run through a couple things that we talk about. One is a Green New Deal, which is a win-win solution. It is an emergency program modeled on the New Deal that got us out of the Great Depression. So it's not like rocket science. This is, you know, this is pretty straightforward. It's an emergency program to create 20 million jobs that put people back to work in greening the economy, our energy, our food, and our transportation system, building the essential infrastructure and rebuilding the infrastructure, like the pipes that are deteriorating in Flint. All over the country, those pipes are deteriorating. So it's you know, it's recreating that infrastructure and also restoring ecosystems, which are also really, really critical. And we also call for meeting human needs. So it's a broad agenda, but with $20 million, you could do a lot of stuff. And it, in one fell swoop, so it targets 100% clean renewable energy by 2030, which is in time to actually fix the problem. So it revives the economy while it turns the tide on climate change, and it makes wars for oil obsolete. That's the other critical thing here. That it's not the economy against the environment, and war is like its own, you know, immutable force. No, no, we fix all these things together. In fact, you can't fix them one at a time, which is part of our, where we depart from Bernie. You know, that Bernie thinks we can sort of stay the course on the war machine because it brings lots of jobs. Well, those are the wrong jobs. And in fact, we got those jobs, you know, we converted the economy in 6 months in World War II. When Pearl Harbor was bombed, it took us 6 months to massively convert the economy. And that was after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Well, the bombing of Pearl Harbor, as terrible as it was, is nothing. It doesn't hold a candle to the massive destruction of climate change. And that's here right now, and it's also not that far away when we look at 10 or 20 feet of sea level rise, which is now predicted for within a couple of decades, unless we dramatically change course, we're going to see massive sea level rise and basically the obliteration of all harbors all around the world. This isn't just Pearl Harbor, this is all harbors, and the billions of people who basically live in proximity to coastlines. This is the absolute destruction of all you know, life-supporting infrastructure and our major population centers around the world. Add to that, we have, you know, the extinctions. We're in the midst of this 6th great extinction, and if you want to survive a great extinction, you need to be smaller than a squirrel, because mammals otherwise don't make it. So, you know, there are reasons why we really need to fix this now, and why we can transform our economy, and moving from the war and fossil fuel economy to the green, sustainable economy is critical, and it can be done. It can actually be done within 15 years. If we could do 25% of the GDP in 6 months, you know, you can be sure that we can transform the entire economy in 15 years. What we need really is, you know, we need leadership. We need a political narrative that actually empowers us to do the right thing. Because right now they're playing off jobs against climate and the environment as if you have to choose one or the other. And in fact, they can only survive if we're doing all of them together. And the benefit is that we don't need the friggin' wars for oil then, which have, you know, what have they accomplished? Well, $6 trillion is what we've spent over the last, you know, 14 years on these 3 major wars. $6 trillion turns out to be $75,000 per household that we will have put into these wars by the time their bills are paid. $75,000 a household. Is that a tax that anybody feels good about? I doubt it. Killed 1 million people in Iraq alone, let alone killed and maimed tens of thousands of US soldiers. And what has it gotten us? Failed states, massively increased terrorist threats, and unbelievable mass refugee migrations, which are really threatening the core of Europe and many other societies around the world. This is absolutely unsustainable. That's why, in many ways, you know, it's not just throwing away your vote to vote more of the same. You know, we cannot go down this road. You know, so it's not just a thrown away vote. It's a vote of self-destruction. You know, don't use your vote as a weapon against yourself. You know, use your vote to push us forward in the way that independent politics has always pushed us forward. Independent third parties have always been a critical part of pushing the system forward. And when third parties were silenced, starting actually around the time of the New Deal, and there was a New Deal coalition, and third parties sort of joined that coalition in the Democratic Party, and we lost the push of third parties. That's when forward progress stopped, and we began to basically backslide. So in my view, standing up and voting a vote of courage and a vote which has a real agenda really pushes us forward. It moves us forward in a very concrete way, and it moves us forward in a way that if we don't have it, we can be sure that we're going to continue backsliding. And we are, you know, it's not like back against the wall, it's like back over the cliff right now. You know, we're in a free fall, and we got to move fast to get out of that free fall. And we have all the makings of doing that. And the Green New Deal is one part of how we don't like just survive, we can actually thrive. And it changes, you know, sort of the context and the basic values so that they're founded on democracy, justice, and human rights. Those become sort of the core of what we're doing under the Green New Deal. I want to mention student debt. We can cancel student debt. It's really critical, not only to solve that problem of debt, but to bring back a generation that's been sort of put out to pasture, you know, prematurely. This is about re-engaging young people, because without that vision and the energy of the younger generation, we don't move forward. That's who it is that transforms society. And we need that energy. All of us badly need it, or we're going to be stuck. That's why canceling student debt is the first priority of our administration. If we have the honor of serving, our first priority is to cancel that debt so that we can liberate that generation to get back involved and become part of society. Once you've canceled debt, you know, then young people can be involved, but right now they're too busy working 3 jobs, you know, 3 part-time minimum wage jobs, and just trying to keep a roof over their head, let alone even pay back their debt. So that's a critical solution. I want to mention also, you know, free public higher education, which goes along with canceling the debt. These things pay for themselves, by the way. We know that public higher ed returns $7 for every dollar that we put in as taxpayers, and it's the right thing to do. We provided high school education throughout the 20th century because it was essential for economic security, and in the 21st century you need that college degree. So by right it should be provided. We call for health care as a human right under Medicare for All, which also pays for itself. These are like basically zero cost investments. It's about taking the money away from the predators and ensuring that we have a streamlined, simplified system, insurance system, that takes the bureaucracy out and puts the health care back in. On public education, I just want to mention that we need to revive public education. We've sort of replaced it with this privatization model, which is essentially test, punish, and privatize, and to bash teachers while you're at it and blame them for all the problems of poverty. You know, so this is nonsense, and it needs to be stopped. And it's been really carried forward again by the Democrats, who've been leading the charge on the privatization of our schools, and also the use of high-stakes testing. So we're calling for fully funding our schools, for basically reinvigorating public education, for doing away with high-stakes testing. Fine to use some tests for diagnostic purposes, but not for, you know, the high stakes, you know, make it or break it. There's no place for that. It's completely disproven by existing data, let alone what we had before. We never should have gone there. Now there's even more reason to come back from that. And we need to ensure that young people come to school ready to learn, that they are housed, that they are clothed, that they are healthy, and they are well nourished. So that would go a long way to enabling kids to learn, because when they're coming to school, you know, breathing pollution, walking through gunfire, coming out of homeless shelters, living in incredible, unstable situations, and 50% of kids in public schools now are in poverty. It's absolutely shocking. When 50% of kids are in poverty, there's just no way they are coming to school ready to be educated. That covers the highlights. I'll also just mention a national action plan for racial justice. We can solve this issue of police violence, and we can solve it now. This is not rocket science. We can ensure that there are citizen review boards, and that there are investigators, that there are attorneys who are ready and empowered. You don't need, you know, an act of the White House in order to have an investigation. You should you should be able to just have investigators at the ready so that people are held accountable when they commit, murder and violence, and all deaths should be investigated, all deaths that take place in police custody. So there are ways to deal with this, and we need to deal with the inherent racism in the economy as well, and in housing and healthcare, and in hiring. The unemployment rates are twice as high in communities of color. So these are fixable problems, and there is a way forward here which is really exciting, which can get the job done. We have the numbers, we have the solutions. By ending these wars for oil, we also bring back an enormous amount of resources into our economy so that we can do what we need. And I should mention one last factoid, and that's the Green New Deal. Because we get so much healthier when we're not breathing that pollution, and not, it's not in our water supply, and the mercury isn't working its way up the fish food chain and all that. We get so much healthier, less cancer, less heart disease, less asthma, less emphysema. It actually pays the cost of the transition in relatively short order. So the Green New Deal actually pays for itself even before you factor in ending the wars for oil. So this is an economic, bonanza in the making. So this is all good stuff. The missing link in all this is about our standing up and pushing forward. And I'll just say a word about the campaign, because it is unbelievably exciting to see all this happening now, to compare it with where we were 4 years ago, and to see how far we've come. Really on all the issues we've been ahead of the curve, and the curve has caught up to us. So we have a whole lot of credibility going into this. We have a lot of attention from the press. We were on CNN. I was on CNN Morning News on Saturday, just this past week, which was a big breakthrough. We've been getting a lot of attention from the progressive press. There is kind of this big focus on Bernie right now, and that's going to run its course. He'll probably win New Hampshire, but America is not New Hampshire, and Hillary has her lead, and at some point the Democratic Party is going to take out its big guns. For Howard Dean, you remember that was the Dean scream. For Jesse Jackson, it was that he was anti-Semitic, anti-Israel. So there's a big smear campaign against him about that. So they will find some very clever and devious way to bring him down. They're already busy scooping up the superdelegates. Super Tuesday will be very stressful if you're not a big corporate campaign and you don't have your super PACs to get you through that. So I think that's going to run its course. The Democratic Party has long since been sold out, and it's run by predatory banks, fossil fuel giants, and war profiteers. They're not about to give it up right now. They're pretty entrenched. So they're going to do their thing, and our job, I think, is to just lift up our, our real way forward as loud and strong as we can, and lay the groundwork for that big shift. When Bernie's campaign folds into Hillary's, there's going to be a lot of people looking for a place to go with integrity. And I think the #1 priority is getting the word out to young people and on campuses, because that alone is enough to win the election right there. If we did nothing but organize among people in debt, not just that you get to renegotiate your debt, but that we can wipe that debt out starting in November of 2016. We can actually do that. So I want to just give you a big thank you for seeing the way forward. And if you have those little forms, I'll mention it now because otherwise it will get lost in the shuffle, that we have qualified for matching funds, which is this way. And thank you for your help, for getting us there. So everything you contribute now, up to $250. If you are in a position to contribute more than $250, you can do that. You never know who in the room might have deep pockets. You never know. The legal limit is actually $5,500. I just say that for the record. But, you know, a contribution of any amount is wonderful and is life-saving, and we have literally thousands of volunteers who've signed up on our website now, and we are just now starting to flesh out the campaign so we can do the hiring, and we can start doing this outreach to so many communities who have been locked out, whether it's young people or, you know, workers. The unions, you know, may be slow to move. They're not going to be the first ones to come around, but there are a lot of rank and file people out there that deserve a whole lot more. The homeless, immigrants. There are 25 million Latinos who've learned, and these are Latinos who vote, in addition to 12 million undocumented Americans who are Latino. They have learned that Democrats are the party of deportation, while the Republicans are the party of hate and fear-mongering and smearing. So they're looking for a place to go. So, you know, and we have, you know, basically people who are ready to just beat a path to our door and do organizing, but we need, you know, we need a staff to help support a real ground game. So your dollars will be put to very good work. They will be doubled. You can contribute online. You can also contribute by check. We're a fully compliant, FEC compliant campaign for the matching funds. So we have a little form there that asks who your employer is and what your occupation is. That's all just for FEC reporting, so they can track when the big, you know, gorillas are taking over the funding. We can see it. That's not a problem we have to worry about. If you are a lobbyist or a CEO of a for-profit corporation, and there are some good corporations out there, like, you know, green energy corporations, etc. But to be above board, we don't take money from anyone who hires a lobbyist. Any for-profit corporation that hires a lobbyist, we just don't take the money so that there are no strings attached.
Yeah.
Whether they're good strings or bad strings, we just don't believe in political strings. Yeah. So that's how it works for us. So I want to just give you a big thank you for being here and being, you know, being the leading edge, for leading the charge to a world that works for all of us, that puts people, planet, and peace over profit, because our lives depend on it and our time has come.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So
we have some questions from people who are watching online, if we can just establish those. So the first one comes from Millie Diaz in Hollywood, Florida.
Okay, great.
During your 2012 presidential run, you posted a total of 469,501 votes, which was amazing but not enough to win. I certainly feel you are the best candidate and would really like to see you take office. What are you doing differently this time around to affect the people's vote to win?
Awesome. Great question. So let me say that this time around, for one thing, we have much better coverage. So we're getting more coverage in the progressive press. And even the not so progressive press. We did CNN the other day. And we're also better organized so that we're using social media. And if you go to Dr. Jill Stein, and that's Dr. No period, Dr. Jill Stein on Facebook. Get on Facebook, because you know that's where it's really happening and where the word spreads. So we have a very big Facebook following now, and that's where a lot of the action is. So it's social media, and it's grassroots organizing, and it's a guerrilla campaign. We have held off the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is a whole other story that I won't say a lot about, except that this is a really terrible trade deal, which basically betrays the whole concept of democracy, because it allows a court to overrule our laws and our regulations. So it basically destroys our ability to make laws. You know, what is a democracy supposed to do? And that Trans-Pacific Partnership is being moved ahead. So anyhow, we have, as a grassroots movement, we have stopped the TPP. It was supposed to have been passed at least a year ago. We have stopped it, and stay tuned, by the way, because we'll be helping to organize actions around the country in February. President Obama is about to sign the TPP, but that does not make it law. So it makes it really critical when he signs it on February 4th that we're going to start undertaking grassroots actions. And I want to give a big shout out for Portland and all the amazing direct actions that you have taken to stop all these terrible fossil fuel. Yes, it's worth barking about.
Presidential debates, we know what happened there. They formed a corporation, and now it's in the hands of a corporation. We already knew they were in the hands of a corporation, but now they really are in the hands of a corporation for these presidential debates. So other than to start a lawsuit, is there a way in?
The corporation, well, they're called the Commission on Presidential Debates.
Right.
And they're a corporation that's run by the Democratic and Republican parties. So it's like an outrageous concept that these two parties that represent 21 and 29% of the vote, they get to wipe out all other options. What we're calling for is for candidates who have the support base to be on the ballot for the majority of voters. We were on the ballot for almost 85% of voters in the last election. That if you're on the ballot in enough states that you can actually win the election, voters deserve to know about you. Voters have not only a right to vote, but they also have a right to know who they can vote for and to know about those candidates. Now, some people say, oh, if you open the floodgates, you know, you're going to have so many hundreds of candidates you can't conduct a debate. But if you use that criteria, that you will be admitted to the debate if you're on the ballot for enough voters that you could actually win the election, we would have 4 candidates in the debate. And over the last many years, we basically would have had 4 to 5 at most candidates. So that would create a real, you know, a dynamic election, which would have a Democrat, a Republican, a Libertarian, and a Green, basically. So you'd really have a spectrum instead of this very centrist, corporatist point of view that differs on social issues, but is, you know, really on the same plate when it comes to war, when it comes to the economy, when it comes to, you know, wiping out workers' rights and privatizing our education and our healthcare system and so on. So it's a problem that can be fixed. How did we fight our way into the debates, you know, in 2002? Actually, we had huge demonstrations. We had huge demonstrations that just kind of went viral. And there were so many people who turned out that they just couldn't stop it. And when you think about social change, huge demonstrations is often the way that it happens, especially if there are moms and babies involved, because that tends to stay the hand of the fascist state. So East Berlin, when they were confronted with these massive demonstrations, they called out the troops, but the troops wouldn't fire because it was moms and babies there too. So, you know, if you look at what just happened in Guatemala, where they basically, you know, imprisoned their president, who had been a part of the, you know, the death squads. You know, that happened based on huge demonstrations as well. So there are several models of peaceful transition, you know, and I think above all we need a huge demonstration on voting day inside the voting booth, and we all need to exercise massive, you know, direct action in the voting booth by going out and defying the political predators and voting on our behalf for a future that works for all of us.
Daniel?
Yeah, I have 2 questions. But
Sure.
I guess my first one is like, what happened to the 2002 race? Did you win? Or
Oh, in that race?
yeah.
Well, what happened was once we won the debate, they took us out of the debate because it became clear that we were very, you know, that my campaign was a real present danger to them. So they took us out of the debate and, you know, sort of totally silenced all knowledge of the campaign. We wound up winning, you know, hundreds of thousands of votes, but they slammed us, and we went to court. The court was you know, brain dead. They didn't get it. But we established a base from which we continued to build. And, you know, we had a city councilor for many years in Boston, the Boston City Council, who was green. And, you know, it's a struggle, but it's a struggle in which we become much more powerful. In 2002, we were really ahead of the curve on green energy, on you know, on conflict resolution, on high stakes testing, you know, on gay marriage. You know, there were just so many things where the Greens have been ahead, and we keep being, you know, validated on issue after issue. So as people become more and more you know, alerted and mobilized that this predatory corporate political system and economy it's a death sentence, you know, we've basically built it, and they're coming.
And
Mitt Romney won.
oh right, okay. And my second question was, yeah, what is the campaign strategy to reach out to Latino and voters of color and communities who speak a language other than English?
Great. We are very well networked with these communities, and now what we need to start doing is hiring on staff to help support their outreach. And I don't know if you know the Black Agenda Report. It's a really dynamite. Does that ring bells for people?
Yeah, it rings my bell. Yeah.
What's that?
It rings my bell.
Yeah, yeah. It's a very awesome, you know, African American perspective on politics, and one of the lead editors for the Black Agenda Report is one of our deputy campaign managers, who is just, in fact, we are hoping to tackle North Carolina and Georgia. Georgia in particular has the largest African American population in the U.S. And it also has the most regressive and restrictive ballot access rules. So it's very hard for an independent third party to offer an option there, but we are undertaking Georgia and North Carolina as we speak. So we have these huge ballot drives ahead of us. And in the process of doing those ballot drives, we're actually working with frontline communities to be a part of that and to help lead the charge. And we need to be able to support them in doing that. So that's a lot of what our current, you know, fundraising is for, so that we can actually do these hires to support the work in those communities. Likewise, we're very networked with the Latino community, and have in our campaign leadership from that community, and there are others who really want to expand. Some of the biggest online organizing that's going on in the Latino community would like to be involved with our campaign, and it takes resources to do that.
And what about the Asian Pacific Islander community? Like,
yes.
Are you connected then to? Yeah.
Increasingly, yes, and this is another hire that we're about to make. So yeah, we're absolutely looking to do that as well, and to really, you know, continue building as a really diverse campaign that lifts up these frontline struggles into the front lines of presidential dialogue and debate, because we shouldn't just be talking about Hillary's, you know, emails. We really need to be talking about Black Lives Matter and Asian Lives Matter, and ending the deportations, and providing refugee status, and creating a path to citizenship for the undocumented, who are really the backbone of our community. So, you know, we've taken positions that the communities are very excited about. I spoke at the biggest rally, actually, that the School of the Americas Watch. Are you familiar with School of the Americas Watch?
In Georgia?
Yes, in Georgia. I spoke at one of their rallies, which was really interesting. I mean, School of the Americas, at a time that immigrants are being bashed, they held the largest rally that they've ever held on behalf of immigrant rights. You know, it just shows you how false and manipulative our political dialogue is. You know, it's really been making immigrant bashing look like it's the norm, but it's really not. It's important to remember, when Donald Trump is winning, you know, like a third of the Republican vote, remember that's a third of 21%, which is 7%. And the media lifts it up like it's the dominant American paradigm. It is not the dominant American paradigm.
Yeah.
It's not, by any means. And by fanning the flames, you know, you just encourage the pathology. And there's a lot of pathology out there, it's true. There is. But there's also a lot of just, you know, where does fascism come from? Often fascism is a reaction of poor and desperate people whose hopes and dreams have been thwarted, you know, and that's where kind of America is right now. So we definitely have the potential to go fascist big time. But we also have the potential not to go fascist by really adopting a progressive and humanistic agenda. And we have to stand up for that unapologetically, loud and clear, and we will move in that direction. But when you have the media that just wants to, you know, create this ridiculous, you know, disgusting public dialogue, which is not dialogue, it's just fear campaigning and smear campaigning, you know, that's really horrible. And our media needs to be liberated, you know, as much as anything else. We need to take back the public airwaves and break up these big corporate monopolies that have destroyed our media.
Yeah.
And that can be done. That can be done. I mean, all of this can be solved. There are solutions for all of this. And that's why, you know, to my mind, the name of the game is about our getting together and being that coalition for people, planet, and peace. Because the minute we do that, we have the numbers, and we have the vision, and we are unstoppable.
There's one more question online. Every day, people are dying of cancer and other diseases that cannabis has been shown to cure. How will you take on Big Pharma and a multi-billion cancer treatment industry that doesn't want to let go of the gravy train? How will healthcare change?
Yes. So, you know, I mean, that same question can be asked about everything, you know, from healthcare to jobs to trade. You know, there are predatory industries that have locked us in where we are, and that's why it's so important that we have a coalition for the rest of us, you know, so that we have policy that's actually driven by the public interest. But in terms of specifically, thank you guys. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, take care. And we'll be wrapping up soon. There are great ways to fix this. So for one, we need to actually use science when we're making scientific decisions. So the minute we use science, the minute you use science when you're talking about
Don't be radical
listed drugs, you know, regulated substances, then marijuana and hemp come off that list of regulated substances. So then we can begin to actually investigate the, you know, the true medical potential of these very important, you know, therapeutic substances. And that means not only for their medical uses, but for hemp, there are all kinds of economic uses as well. So this is a whole area of health as well as a whole area of economic development, and it's grassroots economic development as opposed to like the corporate